All right, let's jump into numeracy with number three. This is question number three. What is numeracy? So, what do you think numeracy is? You're taking your math methods course, so you can pull from that or past knowledge. And this is just a quick write. So, go ahead and stop your video for question number three. All right, now that you've done a quick write on what you believe or remember about numeracy, let's look at and see what it actually is. So, numeracy is a sequence of skills, and those skills include first is counting, and so that would include rote counting, such as one, two, three, four, one-to-one correspondence, so one number to one object. Subitizing, which is if you look here, how many fingers am I holding up? If you looked at that and you said three without counting, then you were subitizing. And then cardinality. So if I ask you how many this is and you tell me three, that's cardinality. So the sequence of skills in numeracy are counting, numeral identification, composing or making sets, comparing quantities, adding and subtracting sets, patterning, standard and non-standard units of measurement, and calendar skills. And we're going to talk about each of these individually, but I want you to look at them as a whole. And what I want you to make sure that you know about these is that this is the learning trajectory. This is the order that you teach these skills in. So you wouldn't teach number identification until you taught counting. You wouldn't teach adding and subtracting sets until you taught students how to compose sets. So again, think about systematic instruction, and these are the foundational skills, and they build as they go on, right? And then these are the foundational skills that those more complex skills will follow. You have to excuse me, I'm having some allergy issues today. So how do you teach? How do you teach early numeracy? Well, duh, you teach it using systematic instruction. And so we talked about systematic instruction earlier, and now I want to go into it more deeply. So when we're using systematic instruction, and right now we're speaking specifically to math, but this is related to any skill that you're teaching. You first are going to have a clear instructional target, and that target, as you know, needs to be tied to your IEP goal, to a state standard, or to an essential element. And for our students, it would be tied to the essential elements, not necessarily a state standard, unless they were working in, say, math on the state standard, but then in reading, they were working on the essential elements. And that target has to be observable and measurable. That is review for you all. And if it's not, reach out and let me know. You're going to use a task analysis. So again, breaking those complex steps into smaller teachable steps. And you might need to use forward chaining, backwards chaining, or total task chaining. Now, if that you should have learned about that in your ABA course, but if you need to speak to me to help me like jog your memory or to expand on the knowledge that you got in that course, feel free to reach out to me. You're going to have prompting and prompt fading. You all should feel really comfortable with this now. So you're going to use some kind of consistent prompting strategy. And here you go. These are the strategies that we were talking about. Things like constant time delay, system of least prompts, most to least prompting, simultaneous prompting. And then you're going to systematically fade those prompts out because our ultimate goal is student independence. You're going to systematically collect data. So it's going to be frequent. You're going to have some kind of structured way that you're collecting data, and you are going to progress monitor those students. So you need to have some kind of a progress monitoring schedule, because you're going to use that data to inform your instructional decisions. We all know that if a student makes a mistake, we're going to engage in error correction, or possibly if they don't respond, you might use the same procedures. But that error correction is going to be immediate, and you are going to consistently use the same type of error correction for a skill. So you're not going to do an error correction on trial one, you're going to use error correction A, and now on trial two, you're going to use error correction B. But we want to make sure that when we're using error correction, that we are supporting students in accurate skill acquisition. And so and some of the videos, I reminded people we're not going to provide reinforcement until they complete a skill, because what if they're not performing that skill accurately? If they're not, we don't want to reinforce them halfway through them completing the skill. We want to make sure that when we see that they are making an error, that we immediately jump in and that we provide them with with a prompt, or some type of support, depending on what strategy you were using, that would support them acquiring that skill and doing it in an accurate manner. We know that we're going to be using reinforcement, and that needs to be individualized to students. So often we fall into good job or even using behavior specific praise, but that doesn't work for all students. And as a matter of fact, there are some cultures, and we want to make sure that we're thinking about our students who are culturally and linguistically diverse. For some cultures, individualizing that instruction and giving praise, if we're giving praise as that individualized, reinforcement, that can actually make some students uncomfortable. So again, making sure it's meaningful and that the reinforcers are individualized, and that we reinforce not only correct responses, but we want to reinforce engagement, because we want our students to be looking and listening and participating and asking questions. We want to make sure that our students have repeated practice across contexts. So we're going to give them multiple opportunities to respond. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm sure we all believe in multiple opportunities to respond and know the positive outcomes from giving students multiple opportunities to respond. But we also, when we use systematic instruction, we need to make sure that they're practicing in different settings, with different materials, with different instructors. So varying that context and giving them the opportunity to practice across different contexts. Because really what we want is generalization, right? We don't want our students to only be able to perform these skills in our class. We want them to be able to go out into the world anywhere and perform those skills. So in order to generalize, we have to plan for that skill transfer to new environments, people, and tasks, which is why, going back to the step before, you're going to have repeated practices across different contexts, because that is how we support that transfer of skill and that generalization. And then we're going to make sure that we are collecting data on maintenance, because we want them to have ongoing opportunities to practice the skill, to use the skill in real life situations. And if we ever see that they're not maintaining the skill, that we circle back around and provide some additional support so that we can make sure that they not only acquire but retain those skills. So this is a really good, I think I would take a screenshot of this if I were you, and then this is something I would keep, because when I'm thinking about my systematic instruction, I could ensure that I had all of those components included. All right, so when it comes to rote counting, what is rote counting? Well, it's saying the names of numbers in sequential order. That's all it is: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so there are several instructional strategies. These are just two that you could use that have shown to be effective when teaching rote counting. So I have a tendency to call it model lead test, but no, that's I do, we do, you do. But model lead test, super effective when teaching rote counting. So is constant time delay. So what I'm going to be doing is giving you a couple of instructional strategies that are effective, or evidence-based practices for the math skill, the early numeracy skill. And then we're going to look at what that learning trajectory is, the order in which you would teach those skills. So when it comes to rote counting, you're going to first teach a student to count from 1 to 5. Now, these are generalizations, because we do know there are students that we're going to start with 1 to 2. Okay, so know that these steps are generalizations. This is the typical trajectory, but our instruction is always individualized. So you're typically, depending on the student, going to teach from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Once they learn up to 10, you then move to 20. Once they move to 20, you move to 30, then you move to 50, and then you move to 100. But notice that we didn't skip from 10 to 30. Remember, we're doing it in these incremental steps, because we want to make sure that we're scaffolding. So 1 to 5 is a small step to 100, but that's manageable, that's teachable, that's easily acquirable. And so again, rote counting, just 1, 2, 3. So here are some things I'm sure a lot of you do in your classes, and this is found often in our early elementary classes, but there are also brain breaks like this that are available for even up to high school. So I encourage you to look and see. These are available on YouTube, and Jack Hartman is just a classic. So here is an example. We'll just look at a minute or so of it. This is one way that you can embed rote counting in other areas of your day, and you can embed rote counting during a brain break.
Dance, sing, and count. Count, count, my brain and my body too. Count, ready, have fun and move with your body side to side. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Step out front and crisscross. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, you get the idea. I have probably watched, I can't even imagine the hundreds of times I have watched that video. It was all I could do not to sing and dance to it. But you can see this is a great brain break. You can build rote counting into anything. Let's count how many steps it takes us to get from our morning circle area to our seats. So again, rote counting is an early numeracy skill, and brain breaks is a great way to embed that in other areas of your day. All right, the next early numeracy skill we're going to talk about is one-to-one correspondence. And what does that mean? It means that you have coordinated counting that involve touching or moving. And so I want to make sure that you realize this is that with one-to-one correspondence, a lot of times people think it's just touching. It can be moving objects. So it involves touching or moving objects to determine the quantity of a set. And let's look and see what kind of instructional strategies you could use. Again, you could use model lead test. So when I tell you you came in with a great foundation, model lead test is a great evidence-based practice for our students. Constant time delay, simultaneous prompting. All of those are really great strategies to use when teaching one-to-one correspondence. And again, when we talked about simultaneous prompting, think how easy it would be when you're standing in line, or when you're waiting on the bathroom, or we just ended our activity and wait, the other small group isn't finished for our rotation, so I've got like 2 minutes here that I can do something. Jump in with one-to-one correspondence, put some objects out there, do a quick probe, and then go through and do 0 second time delay. Quick instructional strategy. So when you're teaching one-to-one correspondence, this is your learning trajectory. You typically are going to teach 1 to 3, then 1 to 5, then 1 to 10, and then above 10. And when you're teaching above 10, initially, it is very common to use a 10 frame, and we'll look at one of those in just a second. So here is early on where you're just counting using one-to-one correspondence. And when I teach this, you teach one number, one object. And so I would start off by reminding my students when we do our review. Remember, when we're counting our bears, we're going to count one number, one object. If you don't know, if you have problems counting or you don't remember how to do it, wait and I'll help you. So again, that's one way that you would work with one-to-one correspondence. And then here is the tens frame. And the reason that we're using this 10 frames, not only is it great organization, because you can imagine, you know how students will you give them objects and they're in a scattered array. The tens frame not only is organization to help them get in that line, but it also helps with subitizing later on. And so when you're teaching one-to-one correspondence, there is a teaching trajectory or a sequence that we use. And so again, really important. This will be a great screenshot for you once it's complete. But the teaching sequence when you're teaching one-to-one correspondence is that first you teach movable objects. And so you're going to have a line and you're going to push them up and to the left. That is how you teach it, with a movable object first. All right, I put out a set of three objects. I want you to count how many bears we have. I have a line. One, two, three. Now that is much easy because they can move it as they count. The next one is a non-movable object in a line. So imagine you have three in a line and then they have to count and they can't move them. That is a more difficult skill, which is why we're building on those skills. We're scaffolding. Next, you do scattered movable objects. So you give them to them in a mixed array, so random order, not in a line, and then they push them up and they count them. And then you move them into a scattered non-movable objects. And we'll look at what that would look like, okay? So this is if they were immovable objects, you would just take them and move them up, and you can easily make a line counter. Take a ruler, draw a line on a piece of construction paper. There you go. You have a line counter, laminate that thing. You can use it for years. So here is where you would be using counting movable objects. This is what it would be like if you were counting non-movable objects that are in a line. And then scattered objects, pretend that we could move these up to a counting line or a line counter. And then here's what they would look like if they were scattered and non-movable. So just again to give you an idea of what the teaching sequence looks like when you are teaching one-to-one correspondence. So here's what I want you to do. And I'm going to have to rely on you because this is a video week. I'm going to have to rely on you that you do this, okay? So what I want you to do right now is to find someone. It can be your partner, it can be a friend, it can be a child. And I want you to try this before we have class next week. And it is extremely important that you do this because it's only going to be when you do a try and apply, you're going to try and apply it, that you know if you have any questions on the actual implementation. And you're going to do multiple of these. So I would write them down so that then when you have a friend or your partner or a child, whoever it is that you're going to be working with, your grandmother, that you have your list of try and applies that you're going to do. So this one is counting with one-to-one correspondence. And what I want you to do is to teach your partner to count using one-to-one correspondent with manipulatives. And you can determine, I would make them movable because that's the easiest. And I want you to use model lead test. Here's just a quick example. Mine are not movable because they're my fingers, and I'm going to do model lead test. And I would say, oh, hi. All right, Cindy, are you ready to get to work? All eyes on Miss Ty. Today, we're going to count how many cats we have. Are you ready? Now, listen, first, what we're going to do is I'm going to go first. First, it's my turn. Then we're going to do it together. And after that, you're going to get to do it by yourself. So I do it, then we do it, and then you do it. Are you ready? My turn. Miss Ty, count how many cats we have. One, two, three, four, five. All right, are you ready? We're going to do it together. Ready? Count how many cats we have. One, two, three, four, five. All right, now it's your turn. You're going to do it all by yourself. Are you ready? How many cats do we have? Excellent job. I like the way you were counting. You counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great job counting. So that's just an example. I know, right? Can you tell I taught little kids? An example of what model lead tests might look like. And so again, what I want you to do, and then I want you to make this would be number 4. So you're going to put try and apply, count with one-to-one correspondence, and then you're just going to write like a sentence or two about how you did on it, okay? All right, let's do a self-check on this so far. How are you feeling about early numeracy, about rote counting, one-to-one correspondence, about implementing it? If you have any questions, make sure you write them down or you email them to me or you ask in class because questions are always, always, always welcome. All right, I'll see you in the next video.